Hello and welcome to Twins Ticket Live. I am your host, Tom. Great to be here. Great to have you here. First time in a very long time since I've live streamed about a year and a half since I've live streamed. So usually I like to do these things when news breaks, but no breaking news today. Just want to get that out in front. Just kind of a stream just to kind of knock off some rust, talk some baseball. Such a cold day here in the Twin Cities. Don't have a whole lot else going on today compared to usual, especially. So just in here trying to not freeze my butt off. If you haven't seen a live stream before, though, I know a lot of times a lot of the kind of value in a live stream is the live interaction, and we'll do some of that. But if you're watching this on replay, I want to stress, stick around. I'm going to run through these topics pretty quick. Probably be fairly similar to my usual delivery of my videos. So stick around, hang out. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or the chat. But here are the topics I want to talk about today, real quick. New owners draft lottery, Rule 5 draft poll results. That's a YouTube poll I ran. I want to talk about those. And then some first base options. Obviously, the Twins have more needs beyond first base, looking at their bullpen in particular. But first base, it's kind of coming into focus here. There was other teams are making moves, of course. Not every other team is sitting on their hands right now. But Jorge Polanco signed with the Mets today. Got a nice, I think it was a 2-year, $40 million deal for Polanco with the Mets. That is, not only just have Polo being a former Twin, that's Twins relevant because that's another sort of first base slash DH role that's being filled. And then Kenley Jansen was the other one that I think impacted Twins. Not only did he sign with Detroit, obviously that impacts the Twins, them being in the division. But Kenley Jansen was kind of a ideal choice if you were going to try to find a veteran reliever out there in the free agent market. And he's a guy trying to rack up saves to build a Hall of Fame resume. So obviously he could have come in here and been the Twins closer. So, it's still hard to know what's going to happen with the Twins budget this offseason. But, he was a guy that I had kind of circled who had been nice. But the new owners we don't know, or the minority or partner, whatever the term that they're using. I can't remember which, but there's two minority owners that are joining the poll ads to own the Twins. There was rumblings. Actually, Charlie Walters of the Pioneer Press reported who one of the owners were, but the Twins very quickly said that was not accurate. And, they haven't really clarified whether that was completely inaccurate or partly inaccurate. But from what I've seen, we should know within about a week who those new owners are. But we've been hearing similar things to that for a couple months now. So I don't know. Is some of the Twins slow off season? We know the Derek Foley era, they've always kind of dragged their feet and let the market play itself out first. But is some of this inactivity having to do with the new owners not being made public, perhaps not have been approved by MLB yet? That's I have to assume that's the case, because if they'd been approved, what's the reason for waiting to announce them? And does that have anything to do with how the Twins have played the offseason? I think it's a valid question. I don't have the answer, to be honest. But as things stand, the Twins are one of only 4 teams that has not made a major league signing this offseason. And one of those 4 was the Boston Red Sox, who traded for Sonny Gray and ate a bunch of his money. So they haven't made an MLB signing, but they signed a pretty prominent MLB player, traded for a pretty prominent MLB player, and paid a bunch of money. So I would say that kind of exempts them from the conversation, even though technically they haven't signed a major leaguer. So it's between the Twins, the Nationals, and the Rockies. So that's the group we're keeping right now. And then draft lottery, the Twins. It's hard for me not to be a little bit disappointed in how that went, because the Twins did have the second best odds to get the number 1 overall pick. Now there's other teams that did much poorly than the Twins did. Twins getting the 3rd pick, can't really complain about that. But it felt like we needed a win, and we had good odds of getting the number 1 picks. I couldn't help but feel a little bit disappointed. It's going to be a lot more chaotic now that the Twins are picking 3rd. not in control of their own destiny. And right now, that's a very muddy situation. There's a very clear cut number one. There's a pretty clear cut number two. A lot can change between now and the draft. Keep that in mind. But then at three, there's just so many guys that are kind of along the same level. So let's take a look here. Gonna jump ahead again, still getting in the groove, back in the groove of live streaming. So thanks for being here. Again, this is kind of like a practice run for me. So I'm ready when we really are gonna go live. When the Twins sign, like the 45th ranked reliever on the free agent market, I'm gonna be ready to jump on here and go live. But again, if you haven't seen the live shows, it's been a really long time since I've done them in the past. I'll kind of jump into the chat every now and then. We got a question about backup catcher. So the Twins traded. They have added a major league piece to the roster, but they haven't signed a major leaguer. They traded for Alex Jackson of the Baltimore Orioles, a catcher who is out of options. So I think we can safely assume that is the plan at backup catcher. And then, yeah, I would agree. This is becoming even more kind of obvious that this has to be the plan. I'd come into the off season thinking, oh, this could be the plan, but now I'm kind of convinced this is the case. The Twins need to use starters as relievers, basically. Yeah, I think if you want to kind of figure out the best way the Twins could build a good bullpen, that's it right there. So I'll kind of jump back in the chat again, but let's jump back to our topics here. The Rule 5 draft, real quick, I want to just call out that, the draft lottery, the Rule 5 draft, just prospect stuff in general. If you're interested in that, check out Limestone Pipeline at Patreon. This show is basically being brought to you by Limestone Pipeline. This is the Patreon project I'm working with Jamie Cameron, also of Twins Daily On, who's kind of a draft expert. We put out 13 pieces of content in our first 12 days. I don't think we're not going to keep that pace up. The winter meetings gave us a lot to talk about. But you can subscribe for $4 a month, or we're putting out free stuff there as well. So if you're into that stuff, which I think most people who watch this channel, a big thing I do is talk about the minor leagues prospects. And speaking of which, the Twins managed to acquire a prospect from the Rule 5 draft. To my surprise, they did not actually keep a Rule 5 pick. That was another avenue in which I thought they could help address the bullpen. What I'm curious now is, the only reason why I can justify the Twins not taking a reliever in the Rule 5 draft would be that they think they can do better either via trade or free agency. So that might actually be maybe I'm stretching out here to be too positive, but that may be an indication that, Derek Falvey and company think they can better address the bullpen elsewhere. So hopefully that's the case. But as it is, they drafted Daniel Suzak, a catcher, and traded him to the Giants for another catcher, a young catcher, Miguel Caraballo, who spent his 2025 in his age 16 season in the Dominican Summer Leagues. This guy is ages away. It's going to be a very long time. If he keeps this up, it's going to be a very long time until he gets anywhere close to the Twins. But he was very good. A switch hitting catcher who had an 874 OPS. That's something like 140 points better than the league average OPS in the Dominican Summer League. Did split his time, did DH quite a bit. So he split his time basically between catching and DHing. Part of that is likely because also that this Giants Dominican Summer League team had some other catchers they wanted to evaluate. You rarely see a catcher in those leagues like really shoulder the load. So again, a teenage catcher. Yes, another teenage catcher. I realized, with trading for Tait and Jimenez at the deadline, some people are complaining that there's so many teenage catchers, but catching depth has been such a pain point for this system that, of course, all three of those guys are way away. Maybe not even one of them might stick at catcher, but I'm not going to be sore about them acquiring catchers. I'll put it that way. And, prospects, baby. Prospects. That's right. All right. So that was the bit I had prepared on the Rule 5 draft. The poll I ran, I don't know. We got a good amount of votes on that on YouTube. I think it was 500 something. Let me pull that up here. Yeah, 515 votes. I feel like that's pretty good feedback. And I was asking, do you want the Twins to keep Byron Buxton, Joe Ryan, and Pablo Lopez, as has been reported? That's the plan, and try to contend. Or would you rather the Twins trade those guys and go into like a full scale rebuild? And I've kind of referred to this a few times in other videos that there's always a big part of the fan base that really just wants to do a tear down and full rebuild. So I kind of wanted to get a number on like, well, hold on. Is it that big of a fan base or am I kind of overestimating? And I was guessing was going to be like 80-20. So not a huge difference from what I was expecting, but it's more people would want full rebuild than I thought they would. Um, I'm not on that side, to be honest. I'm not on the full rebuild side, even though I am a prospects guy, and that would be exciting. I'm not saying I would never take that side because let's say if the Twins had a poor minor league system, if they were at the bottom, maybe even like the bottom 10 in minor league systems, I could see more logic behind trying to trade those veterans and get some more talent in. But as things are right now, this is like a top 5 system in all of baseball. Now that was about mid-season, and they might slide a bit in the rankings because Luke Keeschel, Mick Abel, and Alan Roden all graduated from prospect status late in the year. So they might slip a little bit, but point being, this is a good minor league system. The Twins are going to have the number 3 pick in the draft. So it's going to get better. So it's not like you need a bunch of extra prospects. A lot of their prospects are in AAA as well. That being said, it's never a bad thing to acquire more talent. But I don't think that was really needed at this point. But again, if the Twins were in worse shape there, I probably could have been more motivated to do that as things stand. I still think that, call me crazy, I still think they have an outside chance of being competitive, depending on how they address these needs that they have. And some people might chuckle at that, especially since the Twins lost 90 games last year, especially since they haven't done anything to address things yet. And they're not even with these new ownership and keeping those players, they're not expected to have like a big payroll or anything, but different stories, different situations. But if the Twins can get to 115 million, that was the Milwaukee Brewers opening day payroll last year, and they had the best record in baseball during the regular season. So, I think I don't think it's worth throwing in the towel. And then my other thing I would say is why pull that trigger now when you can always do that at the deadline? And a lot of times teams are more desperate at the deadline and there's less avenues to acquire talent. Like right now, if you have, Pablo Lopez, if you float him out there on the trade market, well, teams could just go and sign Framber Valdez or Ranger Suarez and keep all the players that they would have traded for Pablo Lopez. Come the trade deadline, teams are still going to need these guys. Now, the one thing you don't know is maybe some of these guys won't be healthy at the trade deadline. So that's kind of a fly in the ointment in that plan. But assuming they're healthy, you can get, I think, more at the trade deadline because there's more demand and there's less supply. With the expanded playoffs in particular, there are not that many sellers at the trade deadline. So maybe that is the end fate of Ryan and Lopez in particular, maybe Buxton as well, is that they are traded, but I'm okay with them rolling into 2025 and giving this core one more shot. And if it doesn't work, you can always pivot at the deadline. So I could see that happening. Let's see. What else did we have? Jumping back to the show outline. Next is first base options, but I do want to jump back into the chat here. Take a look. Give me just a moment. Things are again getting back into the rhythm. Benjamin asks, which of these several borderline major league starters profile best as relievers, would you say? That's a great question. I think there's a lot of differing opinions that I could go with, but for me personally, I think David Festa to me is, I mean, you know what? I'm not sure if you're asking about, well, I'm assuming you're talking about internal options. So we'll go with that. I do think David Festa is probably the number one guy in the rotation picture that I would convert as a prospect. I had a hard time believing he was going to make it in the rotation. Just from a innings standpoint. And then also I've seen his stuff play up in shorter outings. I've seen his stuff play up in the first inning. This was more true of him in Cedar Rapids. He would look absolutely disgusting, and his velo would be up 98, 99 in the first inning, and then it would gradually kind of tail off. They seem to have worked with him to where that doesn't happen anymore, but he's sort of lower. He's not amped up in the first inning. He's a little bit more consistent throughout his outings now. And his stuff is good. His velo is good. Um, I think he's also lacking a fourth pitch, which is kind of key to unlocking him as a starter. So David Festa, I think, is the guy that really stands out to me. And then another guy, I think I don't think it would be inappropriate. There's maybe a weird way to phrase it, but I think you could move Zebby Matthews into the bullpen. I'm not necessarily saying I would do that unless you're without the Twins bullpen picture being as ridiculous as it is and as shallow as it is. I probably wouldn't be having this conversation. But as things stand, Zebby Matthews has had some looks in the rotation the past 2 years, and he hasn't pitched very well results wise. Now, some of the underhood stuff look a lot better for Zebby Matthews, but I think he's another guy you could put in the bullpen and really boost that unit, which that needs a lot of help. Connor Prelip is a prospect I would be totally fine with moving to the bullpen, and Derek Falvey's even mentioned him, Marco Raya as well, but I don't think I think Raya still needs, his command is not very good, so he still needs work in AAA. I don't think Raya would be like an opening day option. Connor Prelip might be. He might be, and being a lefty too, that could be a really useful player. I just don't believe in him stretching out. It's kind of like Festa as well, but even to a more extreme. I do not believe in Connor Prelip being able to stretch out as a starter. I think something that is a blind spot to a lot of people that don't realize this, but he's entering his age 25 season, and Connor Prelip is older than Taj Bradley. Connor Prelip is only a couple months younger than Simeon Woods Richardson. So it's not like this is some kid who still needs to improve. But yeah, that's another guy I would move. Now, if you want to say, and I would keep Taj Bradley in the rotation, but if you want to say, you would move Taj Bradley and Mick Abel, there's just so many different ways they could do this, and they have a lot of rotation depth. Andrew Morris, that's another name that you could throw out there. Yeah, there's a lot of depth there, and there's a lot of options, but I definitely think they should move one guy into the bullpen. And I think you could move two guys and still have okay starting pitching depth. Like if you moved Festa and Matthews, and you have Taj Bradley as the five, SWR as the four, you would still have Mick Abel and Andrew Morris as your 6 and 7. There's some other names in that mix as well. John Klein would be in that mix. There's some other names. I didn't prep enough for this one, but that's part of the fun, though. You guys ask good questions, and we kind of talk about some other stuff in addition to my prepared topics here. First base options. Let me pull up something I prepared here on first base options. And again, with your Pete Alonso signing, obviously the Twins weren't going to be involved in him. With like Kyle Schwarber going back to Philly, with just the more things get resolved on the free agent market, the more it's easier to analyze what the Twins might do. It's unfortunate that we do have to kind of wait for the leftovers. to be honest, that is how it's going to be, but hopefully this trend keeps continuing, because as things stand, I'm not sure. Obviously, we're still waiting to really know what the Twins' budget is, but Ryan O'Hearn is so clearly the guy that I would want as the Twins' first base target. He was mentioned as somebody, I think Dan Hayes, the Athletic, mentioned this trio of free agents that the Twins were potentially interested in. I'm kind of under the impression I'm trying to not get my hopes up on O'Hearn, and that's might sound pathetic that that's like my pie in the sky is Ryan O'Hearn. But I think he would be a great fit. I think he would be a good pickup. Was the guy worth 3 wins above replacement according to Fangraphs last year? Reese Hoskins kind of seems to me like the inevitable guy that they're going to end up signing, and that would be better than Cody Clemens. So I wouldn't be too upset with that. Josh Bell, I like, but not. Yeah, I don't think he's a very good fit because the Twins really need somebody to play first base, and he's been more of a DH of late. So, and I know Reese Hoskins isn't a great glove at first either, but I think he's probably a more passable first baseman. O'Hearn's played a bunch of outfield, but he's also played first base as well. Guy who like, runs pretty well for a guy his size. That would be those would be the free agent first baseman. But I think something that's really hard to keep in mind because it's so much more difficult to analyze is the trade market. And that is a possibility both for addressing the bullpen and addressing first base. But again, it's so much harder to analyze that. Christopher Miguel Sano is eyeing a comeback. Miguel Sano is leading the Dominican Winter League in home runs last I checked, and I think OPS. He's having a tremendous, tremendous winter. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, Jared, when I talked about the bullpen, but my starting rotation would be Pablo, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Simeon Woods Richardson, and Taj Bradley. That would be my starting five. And I would move Festa and Matthews probably to the pen. And that's more saying that I think those guys could really help the pen than maybe saying I don't trust them to start anymore. But I'm going to we'll just talk about a potential trade target. But what I want to know is how we would go about making a deal with Baltimore is kind of what I'm trying to figure out. And I can't figure that out. So Colby Mayo is a former, top 30, top 15 overall prospect considered, on these rankings this year at Baseball Reference. Guys primarily played third base in the minors, but in the majors has been more of a first baseman. So I would say certainly fits in better at first base. Now that they signed Pete Alonso, it's probably very available. Colby Mayo has not played well in the majors, as you see for his major league career, a career 634 OPS. That's a 79 OPS plus, but a guy who's played much better in the minors. The Twins do need a little bit more of a sure thing if they're trying to be competitive. But we see here, in his AAA career, almost 200 games, 42 homers and 885 OPS. This is in the International League. That's really important to call out. The Pacific Coast League is such a hitter-friendly environment, but the IL is not. A 522 slugging percentage in AAA, and really his entire minor league career, very impressive. So this is a guy, maybe he is a quad A player, and maybe that's what Baltimore is thinking. But again, if we're looking at Cody Clemens potentially being the starting first baseman, I think this would be an interesting avenue to explore. However, with Baltimore trading or signing Pete Alonso, well, clearly they're trying to go for it. So I don't know and then the Twins in acquiring Colby Mayo would be trying to get him to help the big club. So it's like the Twins would be probably wanting to trade a prospect in this deal, and the Orioles would probably not have any interest in acquiring a prospect. So even though, it looks like these two teams might match up on paper, and if we throw like a David Festa or a Zebby Matthews into the conversation here, they would be interested in that. But then the one major strength of the Twins would you be trading from that, and you'd be hurting that. And even if, again, you were planning to keep those guys in the bullpen, all of a sudden you're hurting the bullpen now. One way or another, you're hurting your pitching staff. If you were to try to trade one of those guys away in some kind of a package, I'm not saying it would be 1-for-1 or anything like that, but yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky to figure out how a trade might work looking across the league. But it's easy to kind of completely focus totally on who are the free agents available, what does that look like, and lose sight of the fact that there are trade options, and that's true of the bullpen as well. I'm gonna stretch this out to just the last 2 years and leave that up for a sec. Yeah, and even though over the last 2 years, O'Hearn has clearly been the choice. Didn't have nearly as good of a 2024 as he did a 2025. But Hoskins would be an upgrade. he would be an upgrade for sure over Clemens, but doesn't move the needle a ton for me. What's the difference between Clemens and Hoskins other than experience? On base percentage, walks. I think Cody Clemens is going to go pretty long stretches without giving you really anything. He's going to hit for some power like we saw last year, but can I get this to work? Let's pull those two up and just, and we'll just limit it to last year, because Clemens kind of broke out a little bit last year. We can see Hoskins, look at that. An 11.6 walks percentage for Rhys Hoskins and a 7.5 walk percentage for Cody Clemens. That's a 332 OBP versus a 281 OBP. You can see Clemens did outslug him, though, and his slugging percentage is pretty close to O'Hearn's. But again, and his strikeout rate isn't outrageous, 24.1. It's lower than Hoskins, but he never draws any walks. He's not a good on base guy. Yeah. And just he's so much more valuable as your bench guy who can play some second, who can play some outfield and mix in a bit at first base, fine. But for him to be the number one plan at first base, I think it would be pretty disastrous. Why no steam to put Larnach at first base? Both him and Wallner are just not very athletic. Those two guys are stiff and not very athletic. Your defense is already pretty poor as things stand. And I think if you stuck one of those two guys, I'll put Matt Wallner. I know you didn't ask about him, but people kind of bunch Matt Wallner into this conversation as well. I think you're giving up even more. I'm sure they've thought about it. They had to have, but I'm sure that's my assumption is they just don't think Larnach would be good there at all. And that's probably a good guess. Now, if let's say they don't acquire another first baseman, having a terrible defensive Trevor Larnach at first base might be a better option than Cody Clemens. So maybe we get to the point where they do explore that. But which prospect do you think makes the biggest impact for the Twins this season? The biggest impact? The biggest impact, I would probably say Manuel Rodriguez. I think he's definitely going to debut. I think he might. He had speaking of guys that have had a good winter league. And I shared some highlights on Limestone Pipeline of his winter league. If you want to go check those out, he might be on the big club pretty early and contribute in a big way. I wouldn't be shocked. Now, he also might strike out in 40% of his play appearances and just look like a quad A guy. He just has such a huge ceiling and such a scary floor. But I think he's going to get the first shot in the outfield. We had another question about Walker Jenkins. I don't think Walker Jenkins is going to really have much of a shot to make the club out of spring training. But I think you could make an argument and in terms of overall value that they can provide, that Walker Jenkins and Emmanuel Rodriguez are the second and third best outfielders in this organization right now, behind only Byron Buxton. So I don't think, and that's really a big reason why I don't get why Larnach's still around, but it might be maybe Rodriguez gets a shot to break camp. And I don't think Walker Jenkins is going to be that far behind him. I don't think they would have had Jenkins end the year in AAA if they weren't going to leave the door open for him to make his debut. And maybe earlier than I wouldn't have thought that Luke Keeschel was going to make his debut in mid-April last year. That's another point to call out, that Kalen Culpepper is in the same situation that Luke Keeschel was entering last season. So he's another guy to throw in that mix. So lots of prospects could be coming up, depending on obviously injuries. That's what opened the door for Keeschel to come through, his injuries. Connor Prelip's definitely in that conversation if they put him in the bullpen, and especially with the need in the bullpen, that could be an avenue. There's quite a few guys that could break through and contribute, especially if we start to envision later in the season in the second half. A lot of young guys in the 40-man roster. should be interesting to see how everything kind of unfolds. Are Erod and Jenkins the starting outfield next to Bucks in my midseason? I definitely think that's possible. The only tricky part to project that out is both definitely Rodriguez, but Jenkins as well. They've been hurt a lot, so that's going to be a barrier for them. They got to stay healthy, and that's been challenging, especially for Rodriguez. That's why I was so encouraged to see him play well in the Winter League, and he is done there, but it's not because he got hurt. The Twins shut him down. I kind of had mixed feelings about that because it was cool that they let him play. They could have said, no, you are injured all the time. We don't want you to play. We just want you to train and not play in games and risk getting injured again. So it's cool that they let him play, but he was tearing it up for his hometown team in the Dominican Summer League. That's like living his other than his Major League Baseball dream. That's like his secondary dream of starring for his hometown team in the Dominican Winter League, having a great time playing well. Fans of that team were just eating him up, loving it. So for things to be going so well, and then for the Twins, it's just a letdown that happened. But I can understand it from their perspective. He has been just hurt so much. Do I think Shelton will be a better manager? I don't think you're going to see a very big difference in managing between Shelton and Rocco, but he has provided let's see, what do I want here? Let's do that. He has provided a different tone, and we are already seeing that's connecting with Royce Lewis. What we're talking about in December, could evaporate by April pretty quick. So we'll see how things unfold. But it's certainly positive that we're getting some nice quotes about Royce Lewis having really good interactions with Derek Shelton so far. So it's a different voice. I think clearly there's something was not going well in the clubhouse. Whether it was Rocco, whether it was Correa, whether it was guys that are still around, I don't know. But there was good reason to make a change. Shelton kind of seems like a lateral change since he's been around here, and he is like a Falvey guy. So it doesn't seem like a huge change. I don't know that he's going to manage in game any different than Rocco would. There's very little variance between managers in that regard anyway in 2025. But can he message better? Can he prepare guys better? Can his staff put together a better game plan against starting pitchers or against the lineup? I hope so. I think there's some hope for that. Shelton would not have been my choice at manager, but I still, I think they just needed a change as much as anything. So here's hoping here. All right. So we ran through all of our topics that I prepared. I think I shared all my stuff that I wanted to. Again, these live streams are basically brought to you by Limestone Pipeline, Patreon project, $4 a month that me and Jamie Cameron are double teaming on. A reason why I haven't live streamed in over a year and a half was I let my subscription for this restream is what this is called, this live streaming studio. I did not renew it. And it's because, I wasn't I'm not insecure on funds. I don't want to think like I'm having a hard time feeding my kids or something. But I think everybody has a certain point where they have to justify some purchases, especially entertainment wise. So this is allowing that. If you're wondering like why would you start a paid wall project, and for me a lot of it is like I'm trying to cover some of my baseball content creator expenses, and that's really helped out with that. And I'm super excited to be able to live stream again. This is so much fun. And again, today there's not a whole lot going on. I'm just trying to take my mind off the weather. It is awful. It's only going to get worse out there too. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for talking baseball. Let's see. We already kind of talked about the guys that might take a jump. One guy I do want to throw out there, though, in addition to who we talked about, is I think I could see Kyler Fedko also, who's entering his age 26 season and it played well in AAA. So there's really no reason not to have him take a look. So and he's a right-handed hitter, and he mixed in at first base at the end of last year. I didn't get a ton of looks at him at first base, but like if that can be an option, that would be huge. That would be huge. So Kyler Fedko is another name just to keep in the back of your mind. He's not a top prospect. He's not on the depth chart. He's not on the 40-man roster either, which is going to be a hurdle for him to clear. But he's just another name in that outfield mix that just I don't get why they have Trevor Larnach around still. Maybe they'll trade him. I don't know. I don't think he has much trade value. If you're asking if this is my full-time gig, it is not. No, not even close. No. Do I ever have any interaction with the Score Notes points? I do not. I don't. I've had some back when I was active on Twitter. I had some back and forth with Phil Mackey a couple times, but they do a good job on their show though. But just not my go-to, I would say. But their Twins show is good. They put out a lot of good content, but no, I've never collaborated with them before. I think that about does it though. But thanks for checking this out. We have 35 minutes. This was some good. I feel like I'm back in the groove a little bit, relearning how to do some of this stuff. So I appreciate you hanging out. I had a good time, and hopefully I'll be able to live stream again before too long. When the Twins when they make a move, maybe I'll jump on, depending on the timing of that. Same thing with the ownership situation too. So thanks for checking this one out. Stay warm. It's supposed to get nicer around here on Monday, Tuesday. So we just got to get through today and tomorrow.